So let's get started. I want to introduce you to our top attorneys that are here with us today. First, I want to introduce you to Austin Freundlich. In 2010 and 2014 to 2019 issues of Super Lawyers, Austin Freundlich was selected as a rising star in the area of general litigation for Pennsylvania, an award only given to 2.5% of the lawyers in the state. He has a perfect rating of 10.0 on Avvo, has been recognized by Expertise as being a top 20 2019 Philadelphia lawyer, and is a recipient of the top 10 attorneys under 40 from the National Academy of Personal Injury Attorneys. Mr. Freundlich specializes in complex litigation, yet has primarily focused his practice on personal injury, property damage, and breach of contract related cases. He is a partner at Freundlich and Littman, LLC. Thank you for joining us, Austin. Looking forward to.
Good afternoon. Hey, everybody.
And I'm also very happy to introduce Greg Littman. Since 2014, Mr. Littman has been selected by Super Lawyers as a rising star in the area of plaintiff civil litigation for Pennsylvania. An award is only given to 2.5% of the lawyers in the state. And look, we have two of them here, so we are in great hands today. Year after year, Mr. Littman has been honored with multiple prestigious awards, including being named one of the top 10 personal injury attorneys in the state of Pennsylvania. An award is given to less than 1% of attorneys in the state. Litigator of the Year for 2019 and the 2020 Elite Advocate. Prior to pursuing his law degree, Mr. Littman graduated cum laude from Drexel University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a focus in finance. I welcome you both. Greg Littman is also a partner at Freundlich and Littman, LLC as well. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and for educating us. Let's get started with you're telling us a little bit about your practice and what it is that you do. You want to take that first, Austin?
Sure. So Greg and I actually started a practice. It's been almost 10 years now. And we have a boutique law firm. We have quite a few attorneys, and we specialize, like you said, we specialize in personal injury, property damage, but we also do complex litigation, commercial litigation, breach of contract work. And we've been doing that for some time. I've actually known Greg since high school. We were both in bigger law firms when we came out of law school. And, you know, we were having that big law firm experience. It was really corporate, and we weren't getting enough of the real client interaction that we valued. So we really came together and we formed a firm that we wanted to, our whole goal was to run things in a different manner, where the client had more say in their cases. And really, we have been fortunate enough to grow since then, gotten to know our clients, and really been able to form kind of a collaborative with the other attorneys that we have, which is why I think we've been so successful in the work that we've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Greg, do you want to add to that a little bit?
I would just say that the part of Austin and my kind of founding principle is to really help people in need, stand up for someone that can't speak for themselves. And the legal process is really complex for an outsider, someone that's never dealt with it. And, you know, relating to our topic today, insurance companies, you know, I think that keeping in mind that how insurance companies make money is by collecting premiums every month or every year and either not paying claims or paying as little as possible. And it's really easy to get taken advantage of by the insurance companies if you're not familiar with the process.
That's critical. So today we're going to, obviously your firm handles much more, but today we're going to focus on negligence and insurance. So Greg, can you tell us a little bit about the personal injury? Give us like an overview about personal injury part of the practice.
Sure. So the two most common types of personal injury claims that we see are car accidents and either slip and falls and trip and falls. And you know, I feel like injury attorneys and people filing injury claims get a bad rap. Sometimes there's a lot of kind of negative connotation that goes around when people file these types of claims. But I can tell you that from our practice and the people that we represent are people that were severely injured Some even died or disabled, that really would be nowhere through the process without an attorney. Basically, getting down to something that's very simple is a rear end car accident. When this happens, people don't think that I'm going to be really injured or this is going to affect me. It usually takes about a week or two to actually feel the effects of such an accident. And if you're not taking the right steps and don't know how to navigate through the process, the other person's insurance company is going to call you and they'll use a simple question like, "How you doing today?" And you're going to say, "Oh, I'm doing good." And then the next thing you know, a year later, if you want to bring a suit, they're going to say, "Well, we asked you how you were doing. You said you were doing good. So are you lying then or are you lying now?" So I think it's really important that from the jump, from when an accident happens, that you take the right steps to make sure that all your rights are protected. And that, that goes for someone that if they're not sure if they want to sue and they're not sure if they're going to suffer a lasting injury, they should still take those same steps and then be able to make that decision down the road.
So be able to consult an attorney before really trying to almost represent yourself and speaking to the insurance companies.
That's correct. I would absolutely consult an attorney first, and most attorneys, including our firm, aren't going to give you any type of high pressure sales tactics. They'll give you certain steps to follow and let you make that choice for yourself. Is A, if you'd like representation, and B, if that attorney is the right attorney for you.
Great. That's good advice. Austin, what about property damage? How is that differ and how do you work with people in that regard?
Yeah, certainly. So usually when we're talking about property damage, we're talking about floods, fires, hurricane events, storm-related events that damage your home. Something that a lot of people don't seem to think about until it actually happens to them. They're paying, they're paying their home insurance, they're paying their premium, but they never really take a look to see what exactly is covered by the policy. And they never really take a look to see what steps they have to take to ensure that they are covered for certain types of damage, whether that's having certain endorsements in their policy and reading them over, or whether that is just, taking a look through the very, technically written policy, which nobody really reads when they're signing it. So we often have people that call us that are shocked that, they had significant damage to their home, and now they're not getting coverage or they're getting pushed back from their insurance company. What they also don't know oftentimes is that they have a specific time limit to, they really have a time limit to bring a lawsuit. And that after that time limit elapses, they lose the ability to ever bring a lawsuit against their insurance company. The insurance company knows that. And the insurance company sometimes, your insurance company is going to act in good faith. They're going to try to get to the bottom of your claim and they're going to try and compensate you. But other times there are a lot of insurance companies that what we see is they delay the claim. They pay you piecemeal. And you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out how to pay, for instance, you had a leak, you got to redo the ceiling in your kitchen. You're trying to figure out how to get the money to redo your kitchen, which you're entitled to. You may be entitled to under your policy. And they're only paying you for the remediation, for the people to come in and knock out the drywall, but they're not paying you for the fixtures. They're not paying you to get the tiling done. They're waiting to do that. They're asking for unreasonable requests for proof. So we see that often in our practice. What happens when you have an attorney that knows what they're doing is they step in, they assess the damage, and they really hold the insurance company's feet to the fire and say, hey, look, here's what you have to do. Here's the timeline that you have to do it in. And if you don't do it, we're going to bring a lawsuit. So we have, as our practice, we focus on, residential losses. So somebody, they have a loss due to, for instance, a fire in their house and they have damage. They would contact us and we would help them through the claim. And we also do commercial. So we also do claims for businesses that experience loss and they're looking for coverage as well. So that's something that we've been involved in for the 10 years since we started our practice. And that's something that I find that there's a large gap in knowledge in the general public as to what's covered and what's not covered, and the process that you have to go through to actually successfully get the money that you're entitled to under the terms of your policy.
Well, it seems like whether it's personal injury or property damage, it's a lot more complex than just making a phone call to your insurance company and saying, this is what happened, now send me a check. It's a lot more complex than that, and having attorneys that can really go through all of that red tape and be able to speak the language that the insurance company is speaking is going to be very critical and very timely, because it sounds like you just have enough time to do it. And if you miss that time frame, you're really out of luck with that.
Exactly. And the problem is that you find, people will say, okay, I'm going to try and do this on my own, and they won't pay attention to the time limit that, the time is critical in these cases, because these companies know that when they hit that, it can be around 2 years sometimes, but it also depends on how your policy is written. When you hit that mark, you might permanently lose the ability to bring a lawsuit, and that's a huge thing.
Wow, that's important to know.
And if I could piggyback on that for a second, I think it's critical whether you're dealing with personal injury or a homeowners or commercial insurance claim. It's critical to know what your policy is. And I think that people should know at the inception when they're purchasing, even if it's a simple car insurance policy, what are they actually purchasing? We get a lot of phone calls from people that say, yeah, I have full coverage. Full coverage doesn't really mean anything. That means that their damage to their car is covered. There's distinctions such as full tort versus limited tort, or whether they have uninsured, underinsured coverage, that people just don't know. That's going to dictate how their lawsuit goes, or if they're even have the ability to bring a lawsuit. And I think that education process starts at the beginning, at the purchase of a policy. And, when dealing with attorneys, I have no problem if someone calls me and says, hey, I'm not a client. I haven't been injured. My property hasn't been damaged. I'm thinking about buying this policy. Could you review it for me and let me know what my rights are?
That's a great idea, because I was just going to ask you that. Is that something that people can do? Because honestly, again, just as we're talking with the insurance companies, it's another language. And if you're not used to reading contracts and you're not used to reading that type of language, you're not going to be able to necessarily know what you don't know, because you all have the experience of what someone could encounter. And, perhaps we could talk a little bit about that, like jumping back to personal injury, what should someone do if they're in a car accident? Car accidents and slip and falls were some of the most common personal injury claims that you deal with.
That's correct. And I would say that documentation is key. Document. Obviously, your health comes first. So if you need to go to the hospital or the doctor, do so. But generally, step one is call the police, make a report. Step two, take photos, make sure you exchange the proper information. And step three would be then to go to the hospital or go to the doctor. It's really important that a claim, and again, not to cross into property damage, but a claim from the beginning needs to be documented. All those things that you don't think about, you really need to think about from the inception of when it happens.
And making sure you get a copy of all those medical records. And when you get a police report, do you have to take down all that information yourself, or can you rely on the police report to have, the other driver's information? Do you recommend that people do that themselves as well as having the police report?
Absolutely. And today with the technology, it could be as simple as snapping a photo of the other person's driver's license and insurance information and license plate. It's super easy these days to get all that information. Obviously, I would still recommend filing the police report, getting the police out there. Sometimes, though, police in Philadelphia, the police could take hours to arrive. Some people opt not to wait. I would still report it. I would still then go down to the station and fill out an incident report. So there's documentation that it happened. Any type of photos or videos you could take, would be great, as well as getting a discharge report from the hospital or the doctor that you go to.
And very important with what you said about calling the police sometimes, because you don't think it's a big deal. You might not think it's a big accident. Like you said, 2 weeks later, you can have terrible back pain. So never try to assess the injury, assess it at the accident.
And just to say something to that, I can't tell you how many times we hear someone call us up and say, I got in a car accident. I don't know whether or not I should go to the hospital because I didn't file a police report, and my pain, it's kind of coming and going, and I don't know whether or not I should go. And then 2 weeks later, that person's in excruciating pain. It's always important when you're in a car accident to go to the hospital if you can. If you can do it, do it. Because first off, you have an adrenaline rush after a car accident, so sometimes you're not feeling the level of pain. You could have something broken, and we've seen people with tears, with breaks, with herniations. Herniation is one of the most common injuries when it comes to a significant strike in the rear of the car. So for a lot of times people get these herniations, which are life-altering injuries potentially, and they don't know that they have it, and you can walk around and you can make it worse. But that's something that will be with you for the rest of your life, and it's serious, and you have to follow up with it. And this is what an insurance company will do. They see that you didn't go immediately to the hospital. Now they're saying, okay, wait a second, they weren't really injured. How do we know they didn't just go home, pick up a basket of laundry and hurt their back? That is the common argument that you hear over and over and over again, coming from the insurance company. So it's
not knowing that as an individual, I might think, oh, well, maybe I did pick up a laundry basket, not realizing that that really is a tactic where an attorney would understand that and know that these injuries don't necessarily happen immediately. So, don't try to be a medical technician or an attorney at the scene of a crime. Just
people talk about, whiplash being a common thing. Oh, I have whiplash, it'll go away. But there are complications that from just whiplash. There's something called a loss of lordosis, which is the straightening of your spine, that can happen towards your neck. And it could also have serious consequences moving forward in the future. We've had cases for young adults who have been in their 20s who've gotten that same injury, and 5, 6, 7 years later down the line, they're still not able to do things like their everyday runs that they were doing beforehand because of the injury. Wow. So it can be, like Greg said, the most important thing at the start is going to be to go to your health. That at the start is the most important thing, not only for to see what you have, but it also increases the value potentially of your case. And you want to make sure that the insurance company is on the hook for your injury. So
we're talking a lot about insurance companies, but what if the person doesn't have insurance, the person who hit your car or who was involved with the accident? What if they don't have insurance? What happens?
So I think that, again, going back to what I said, your own insurance policy sometimes dictates what type of coverage or recovery that you can have. Within your own insurance policy, you have the option, it's not required, to buy something called uninsured or underinsured coverage. That would be for that exact case that you just mentioned. If a 15-year-old steals his parents' car and goes out and T-bones you or rear-ends you, and there's no coverage, your own insurance company would then have the obligation to compensate you for your injuries.
I literally just wrote that down because I think that's a really important thing that I would not have thought about in buying insurance, that I would have assumed that would be something that would be covered. So, I mean, that's a huge bit of information. Thank you for that. And what about medical bills? Like, is a medical treatment typically covered, or is that something also you have to make sure in your insurance?
So that, again, is something with your own insurance policy. In each state, it's called something a little bit different, but in Pennsylvania, it would be called PIP, or personal injury protection coverage. And the state minimum to drive on the road is $5,000, but you can get as much as they're willing to offer you to cover your medical bills. But that is something that, again, that's dictated by your own policy, not the other person's policy.
Wow, so much of this, you have to do your homework ahead of time. Now, what about with slips and falls? What is that?
Just going back, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just going back, one last thing about that, and I don't know if we covered that or not, but just to make sure that we cover it, because it's so important, and that is full tort versus limited tort. I don't know if we've spoken about that, but that is one of the most important parts, I would say, of when you're reviewing your policy. And it's not something that your agent is going to tell you about or your broker when they're going over the policy with you. But full tort in Pennsylvania gives you the opportunity to sue for pain and suffering. If you do not have full tort coverage, if you don't have it, then you cannot sue when you are in an accident, even if it's not, if it's somebody else's fault and you're hurt, you cannot sue unless you have a life-altering injury. And as you can imagine, insurance companies are going to fight you all day as to what qualifies for a life-altering injury. So let's say you break your leg, right? But you recover from it. But during the period when you broke your leg, you're out of work for a period of months. And now you still have residual pain. And it's something that you're not necessarily treating for, but it's there, right? But you stopped your treatment. That, in the minds of insurance company, they're going to argue that that is not a life-altering injury and you cannot get compensated for it. And it could it could really set you back. You could be missing work, you could be missing time, you could have pain be brought on by complications of your break. You could have arthritis that comes later on. It can very well be a life-altering injury, but this is something that you have to fight for if you have a limited tort policy. It's called something else in New Jersey, and they have a threshold requirement there, but it's the same sort of principle. So it's something to be very aware about when you are reviewing your insurance policy.
Wow, that's another really important thing to think about. I mean, even the words full tort, limited tort, I mean, this is just not language that your average person is going to understand what that is.
And just like Greg said, usually people will think, they assume that they're covered and they say, we have full coverage. We have full coverage. Because sometimes I think the reason they think we have full coverage is that, they've been told by their broker at some point that they're covered from a number of these different circumstances with collision and, maybe they have PIP, but they're not told. But if it does not read full tort, you do not have the type of coverage that I think they assume that they have, which is that you could sue for pain and suffering. So that's a very important thing.
Thank you for bringing that up and making that very clear to everyone. So tell me a little about slips and falls. How is that, different? What does that entail? Who pays for the injury in these circumstances? What's different in this type of?
Sure. So typically in a slip or a trip and fall, the property owner would be the responsible party. And the differentiation between an auto accident case would be that there's no policy that the injured person has. So no one's paying for their medical bills. The property owner is not going to pay. They're going to dispute it. And you're going to end up actually having to go to suit to get reimbursed for the medical bills and pain and suffering. For a slip or trip and fall, the most important thing from a legal perspective is notice. Is you have to prove that the property owner either had actual or constructive notice, that they knew or should have known that whatever the condition was, whether it's some sort of liquid, whether it's an obstruction, a crack in a sidewalk, you have to prove that they knew or should have known that that was a hazard for people.
Okay, so then what should you do when let's say this happens? What do you recommend that a person does to make sure they have all their information?
Again, I can't recommend enough the documentation, especially with today with technology. take a photo, take multiple photos, take a video. If there's any witnesses around, speak with the witnesses, get their name and number, their contact information. That is crucial. I mean, assuming that you're well enough to be able to speak and speak with people, do all that. Again, call the police, make sure there's a police report, make sure it's documented. The thing about specifically slip and falls is if someone slips and falls and then goes home or goes to the hospital, the store or the property owner could just go clean that up. And if they want to go back the next day, it could not be there. So photos, documentation are very important. Likewise, in certain circumstances, it's important to inform the property owner immediately and ask them to preserve their video. Because a lot of these surveillance cameras, the footage will auto-delete after 24 or 36 hours unless you notify them. And that's super important, as well as depending on where you fell, certain townships, cities, governments have certain statutes in place where you have to put them on notice within a certain amount of time, or like Austin was saying, you lose your right to sue.
So do they have to, once you give them notice that, well, you say, please preserve your video tape, are they required by law to do so? Or can they just go ahead and, is there something that protects you once you've made that request?
So if they fail to preserve the video, that creates what's called a negative inference. That means you can go to a judge or a jury and say, listen, we sent them this preservation notice. They failed to preserve it. The only reason that they failed to preserve it or they destroyed it is because it shows exactly what we're saying it shows. So the judge instructs them, you can make that connection that the reason they destroyed or didn't save the video is because it hurts their case.
Okay.
And just if I could add to that, I just think that this is really what the value of an attorney is in these types of cases, because 99% of the time we get the call that somebody's been involved in a slip and fall injury, right? And if they're lucky, there's video. If they're lucky, there are witnesses. If they're lucky, that's the scenario that they've taken pictures. But let's say they were really injured, as Greg was saying. If you're really injured, you're not going to have the ability to take out your camera and take pictures and to see what the observation, observe what was around you potentially. So now you're in a position trying to recall from memory after this traumatic event what happened. So most of the time we find that we're playing detective here, where we're trying to figure out exactly what happened and what caused the fall, because the property owner is not liable if they were not negligent. So if you did something that caused the fall, by just solely your actions, you caused the fall, they're not going to be negligent for that. But if they left something out, it was a slippery surface, or, there was ice or a crack in the sidewalk, and you tripped over it, or in front of their store, or if you're in a store and, someone spilled something and they never cleaned it up. Those are the type of things that the property owner is going to be responsible for. And that's when it becomes crucial, like if you're with somebody, to make sure that an incident report is filled out, because then you have the names and you can actually, you have the names, the numbers of the people that saw that's what they're supposed to take down. So it's an important thing. And that's where I think attorneys can add value, because they come in and they're able to send these preservation notices to the property owners, and they take it more seriously. They take the preservation process a little bit more seriously, I find, versus when they don't, or people sit and they wait. They think, that they're going to wait and they're going to see how their injury plays out to determine whether or not they want to move forward with an attorney. At that point, I feel like a lot of times the evidence is lost. So I know a lot of people think, well, I don't want to get involved in litigation, but it can be very important to get an attorney involved just for the preservation of evidence in a case, not necessarily to sue, but just to preserve the evidence in these types of cases.
So really in whether it's a car accident or a slip and fall, having an attorney allows allows you to preserve evidence, make sure that you get the right evidence that's necessary, and can kind of cut through some of the jargon that you're really not familiar with, whether that's with a property owner or with an insurance company. You know, an experienced attorney is going to be able to guide you through all of that and make
That's
sure
correct.
that you don't make mistakes.
Yes.
That's great. So Austin, tell me a little bit about the property damage part of your practice.
Sure. So as I said, you know, before, we focused primarily on property damage. I mean, what we see often are cases of fire, flooding, you know, a negligent contractor that in Philadelphia that might have pierced the gypsum board that connects the two houses in a row home situation. We see those cases all the time, or contractors who've done a bad job and damaged your home. We see cases where there's been oil spills in people's basements. We see cases where there is, you know, a weather event. Hail damage is a big one. Usually when there's hail, for some reason, it knocks off shingles in your roof. And that's something that is common, and it creates flooding. And under the terms of a good policy, you'd be entitled to have your roof replaced. And a lot of people don't realize that. So that's where we see that come into play. We just opened a practice actually down in Florida as well, that focuses on hurricanes. And, you know, I heard that there are going to be hurricanes rolling in and named tropical storms this year in August, quite a few. When Hurricane Sandy hit back a few years ago, we were in New Jersey, and we handled a number of those claims for people who essentially lost everything. And these insurance companies were saying, wait a second, this isn't from the storm, this is wear and tear. I mean, you wouldn't believe how they categorize the damage in these properties. They'll come in. We saw one house where there was a hole in somebody's wall, and it had a hole in somebody's wall from a tree falling in. And the insurance company was trying to say that it was from wear and tear and not the upkeep of that wall. I mean, just completely ridiculous scenarios. And that's really where we come in and fight for the insured and make sure that the insurance company is going to pay what they rightfully owe.
And take the emotion out of it, really, because I mean, I'm getting furious just hearing you say this. And, you know, as a homeowner, you can kind of get lost in the emotion, and that's not where you need to go. You need to go with an attorney who can speak the language that they speak and bring it to a resolution to help you. But I can—
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, look, we get mad too. We get mad too, but we have tools that we can use when it comes to litigation. A big one is a bad faith claim. And insurance companies that do not pay their insureds out, you know, there are these guidelines that they have to follow. And if they're not operating in good faith, if they're trying to delay, if they're trying to make you produce unreasonable things in proof of your claim, if they're not taking certain things into account that they should be taking into account, there are statutes that allow for punitive damages against them. And they can be an exorbitant amount of fees. So it really, you know, actually at times people come to us and we will look at their case and we'll say, wait, this is bad faith right here. And those are the types of cases that we like to get involved in too, because one, we get angry just like you got angry when we see what they've been going through. You know, imagine the house that you live in, that you've put money into, it's now been destroyed, and you're trying to get it back up and running, or you're just trying to get back to where you were, and now you can't do it, and now you lose the home. That happens. And you know, and it's all because the insurance company is dragging their feet and they're refusing to pay the claim in a timely manner, and they're refusing to take things into consideration. When we see those claims, we put them into the suit and we add bad faith claims. And, you know, that's something that we've done on a number of occasions.
So bad faith would mean, you know, I've entered an agreement with an insurance company. I'm under the impression, or it is clear that I'm covered, but they're not covering it. Is that
Yes,
Kind
that's
of like the
essentially,
layman's way of saying,
that's essentially what it is. I mean, it's a little more technical in the sense that there are guidelines that they have to follow in terms of how they operate and what, what they do. And there are, throughout the years, the law, the case law has continued to evolve to incorporate different types of practices as being bad faith practices.
okay.
So yes, I would say that, but overall, yes, if they are not operating in good faith, if they are not going in and saying, hey, I'm taking your claim seriously as I have to by the terms of the policy, and I'm looking over what you say, and I'm responding. Sometimes they don't even respond, but I'm responding, and I'm responding in a timely manner, and I'm not causing additional delay, and I'm not causing additional expense. If they do that, then they could find themselves as qualifying for using bad faith practices.
So with the homeowners insurance, is it similar to car insurance where you need to really be very careful in terms of what the coverage is, and are there a lot of this full tort and all these other terms that we need to be aware of? And is that something we should talk to an attorney before we even have a homeowner policy?
I would say that yes, you should talk to an attorney. No, you don't have any blatant, no, it's not full tort, limited tort. It's not something like that, but your deductibles are big. What are you going to be paying in a deductible for your loss? Are you getting proper coverage is huge. Let's say you have a $200,000 house and you have a really bad broker who gives you coverage for $150. That's you see that sometimes. Or do you have proper coverage? One part of the claim isn't only the damage to your house, it's the damage to the contents in your house. So if there's flooding and you have all these boxes in your basement and they're full of clothes, or they're full of merchandise if you're a store, and that gets destroyed, do you have proper coverage for the contents? That's another part of your claim. That's something that when we get involved, we come in, we get the right people involved. We put together content lists to make sure that we get the values for the content so people can be restored to, at least get market value for those items. And that's a consideration. And I find that with policies, really with these policies, we almost always say to each other, Greg and myself, when we're reviewing these cases, wow, I wish they came to us sooner. Wow, I wish they came to us when they were getting this policy so we could advise them on this. So yes, definitely should get an attorney when you're going over that, because having your home, that's your biggest asset, right? So
yeah. No, that's really, again, it's something that I never would have thought about before. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important part. What about, what if your property is damaged in a flood or a fire? Is it the same as a hurricane, tornado? Like, are different occurrences different in some way? What happens there?
Yeah. Well, it depends. When they're declared disasters like a hurricane, it might affect more people. So there could be coverage coming from their government, and there could be different ways that those claims are handled. So, with Hurricane Sandy, all of those claims got put on what was called a fast track in federal court in New Jersey, so that the process could be expedited once there was litigation. And also the time limits for bringing a lawsuit can be extended in those disasters when it's declared a disaster. For fires and floods, certain things aren't covered. If you don't have specifically flood insurance, you might not get covered for any of your loss. You might think that you have that, and you might not have it. Another important thing to consider when you're looking over your policy. With fires, I guess the key there is also documentation. You might have all of your invoices that show purchase of certain items that were in the house that are now burnt and destroyed. So how do you prove that those things are worth what you say they are? I mean, those are the the way that those claims can vary.
Wow.
But the
Yeah,
litigation process is usually similar.
you need a fireproof,
A fireproof room
yeah,
and fireproof cabinets. That's what
exactly,
they have.
something
Yeah.
that you can really protect yourself. So, what about a public adjuster? Where do they come in this whole scenario?
Okay. Yeah. So public adjusters are basically, you have a public adjuster who will come in for the insured as well, usually. And what they'll do is they'll do something similar, and they'll document the loss, and they'll try to get the insured paid. The problem is that even though there are good public adjusters out there, there are a lot of public adjusters that cause more harm than good. So you see people come in, they're not taking timely, quick inventory of what was damaged. They're not getting contractors in to document the damage that was done to your home in a quick, expeditious fashion. And now you're in a position where the insurance company has been trying to contact you and get certain information from you, and they've been delaying the process, so they can cause harm. And then sometimes we get files that public adjusters have been on, and they create more problems. A good public adjuster will have their people in place. They'll go in, they'll assess the damage in the property. They will have their contractors in, they'll write up estimates. But then again, a public adjuster can't bring a lawsuit, so they only have really the ability to take it to a certain point.
So can you work with an attorney instead of a public adjuster?
Yes, and oftentimes we have people that come to us rather than a public adjuster, because they understand that we are going to be ultimately able to do more in the end, in the back end of the litigation, where we're able to bring a case for property damage into a lawsuit.
And you know what to look for that you need in the lawsuit to be able to have evidence and all the things that are going to be needed, where I would assume a public adjuster, since they're not doing the lawsuit piece, they're not going to be aware. It's kind of that same thing. You're not, what you don't know, you don't know. And
correct.
To have someone who's walking in knowing the potential pitfalls is beneficial.
Look, unfortunately, it's like playing chess with these insurance companies, and you have to think moves down the line. You really do. So you have to preserve your position continuously during the process.
It's amazing.
Elizabeth, I would say that something that I'd recommend when somebody is interviewing either an attorney, a public adjuster, any type of person that they want to employ for anything we're talking about today, speak with that person, ask them what their plan is, ask them what they're going to do. Make sure that whoever you're hiring is familiar with this process, knows what to do, knows who to hire. Cases that we're talking about on both sides require experts. Experts for, engineers, like Austin was describing a case where in a hurricane, they're saying foundation damage was pre-existing. You need to hire an expert engineer that is familiar with these types of claims, that is a specialist in that field. And if the attorney or adjuster that you're working with is not familiar with these expert witnesses, you're really at a disadvantage, because you better believe that the insurance companies have these people lined up to do that. So really ask them what their process is going to be, who are they going to hire, who do they work with, and what are their prior results.
That's just a really important thing. What is it that you should look for in an attorney when you're in this situation? And certainly what you said, are they, privy to the different experts that are needed, and do they have experience in dealing with insurance companies? And what would be some other questions that you would recommend that people ask before hiring an attorney, and what they should look out for?
Well, I think, and I'll let Austin chime in a moment, I think the most important thing is expectations. One of the first questions I ask a client is, what are your goals? What in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, where do you hope to be? And you have to make sure that whoever you're hiring, you have the same expectations, because if a client has expectations for X and your expectations are Y, that neither party is going to be happy. So that's the first question that we always ask is, okay, well, what are your goals? And then how do we meet these goals?
Mm-hmm. That's important.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. I would totally agree with that, because I think that there are, litigation, when people are looking for attorneys, usually it's not because they're at their best point in their life. And there's a lot of, often there's a lot of emotion that goes into where they are. I feel like a good attorney is going to give you an idea of what is going to happen in the future, and whether that is that, and they're going to be straightforward with you. We tell clients, if we think that they have a losing case, we will say it. This is what you have to expect, and this is what, if you're doing defense work, this is what you're potentially going to have to pay potentially. So we'll tell people that. They don't always want to hear it, but we will say that. So I think that that's an important thing. I think to really get an idea of, what your expectations are, as Greg said, but also, speaking to somebody who's experienced enough that is going to be able to clearly tell you what could happen in the future.
That's important. And also, I wanted to say too, something that really stood out to me in the beginning when you were talking about your firm is the fact that you care about people, and that, you wanted to be more collaborative with clients. And I think that that's something that you don't typically hear from every single attorney. And the fact that, you shared that, right away, that that's something that you value, I think is an important piece in finding an attorney that you can rely on, and that will tell you the truth, whether it be something that you want to hear or not hear. Make sure that you are prepared, make sure that they have the experts that can help you, and building that confidence so that you know that you're in good hands. Those are all really important things. So, I cannot believe how quickly this time went by, because this information is so valuable. And I really am so grateful that the two of you were here with us today and able to shed a tremendous amount. I could tell you I've gained a tremendous amount from just hearing these things that you're talking about and thinking about how to prepare yourself in case something like this happens, and certainly giving people real clarity about what to do once it does happen. So I want to thank you both so very much for being here.
Freundlich.
It's
and hard to say.
Thank you so much. The two of you really were so generous with your time, and
well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's
our pleasure.
Thank you for joining us at a Schneps Media webinar. Hope that you'll join us for other webinars. This webinar will be available on YouTube in just about 48 hours. You'll be able to see it again and share it with people, this incredibly important information. So thank you for spending the time with us today, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.